Hello and welcome to the Business Talk podcast. I am your host Deepak. It is my great pleasure to welcome Dr. Ellen Mendenhall, Associate Dean and Grady Rosier Professor at the Sorrell College of Business at Troy University and Executive Director of the Manuel H. Center for Political Economy as our distinguished guest on today's podcast episode. Dr. Ellen Mendenhall also serves as a visiting fellow at both the Heritage Foundation and the Madden Center for Value Creation at Florida Atlantic University. Dr. Ellen has published several research papers, books, and continues to contribute significantly to advancement in his field. His television show Success Stories airs on local television throughout Alabama, and his radio segment, World to the Wise, is featured on Troy Public Radio. He also writes a weekly column for 1819 News, Alabama's bold and innovative conservative news outlet. Dr. Mendenhall holds a BA in English from Furman University and MA in English from West Virginia University, a JD from West Virginia University College of Law, and LLM in Transnational Law from Temple University, Beasley School of Law, and a PhD in English from Auburn University. In this episode, Dr. Ellen Mendenhall will share key insights from his widely acclaimed book, Writers on Writing, Conversations with Ellen Mendenhall. Kicking off this exciting conversation, let's warmly welcome Dr. Ellen Mendenhall to the show. It's a real privilege to welcome you, Dr. Ellen. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here with you.
Dr. Ellen, you bring a unique dual lens to your interviews, that of a lawyer trained to ask probing questions to and a writer attuned to nuance and narrative. How do these combined perspectives help you uncover deeper truths in your conversations with authors?
Well, being both a lawyer and a writer actually creates a wonderful synergy rather than conflict. The two professions share surprising parallels that strengthen each other. Lawyers are professional writers by necessity. We draft briefs, we draft motions, memos, and arguments that have to persuade, clarify, and navigate complex ideas, just like a novelist does. So the average lawyer probably writes thousands of words every day, constantly refining his ability to structure arguments and tell compelling stories. And legal practice is actually fundamentally about storytelling. Each case presents characters with motivations and conflicts with stakes and narratives that have to be structured for maximum impact. So when we present a case to a judge or a jury, we're essentially crafting a story that makes sense of messy human situations. Legal practice exposes you to life's full spectrum in ways that few professions can match. So both a writer and a lawyer observe human behavior and psychology. We have to understand client motivations, witness credibility, and opposing counsel strategies. And that's the same thing you have to do when you study human nature to create believable characters in literature. So rather than competing pursuits, I find that there are complementary disciplines that enrich each other in surprising ways. Lawyers and writers are both doing very similar things on a day-to-day basis.
Very insightful. Many authors in this book discuss the tension between personal beliefs and the subjects they explore, such as the Civil War. As a writer, how do you personally navigate this boundary between personal stance and narrative objectivity?
Yeah, well, I guess I don't believe complete objectivity exists. Not really. Every selection of detail, every arrangement of scenes, every stylistic choice betrays the writer's hand. I never hid behind some academic pretense of neutrality. So my presence as the author is felt on every page, even when I don't explicitly appear. Of course, I'm talking about in my own writing and not necessarily in the writing of these authors I interview. But I should be clear, I write across a variety of genres. I do scholarship, I do public policy, I do creative work, and the context does matter enormously. When I'm crafting policy analysis, I'm careful to ground my arguments in verifiable evidence while acknowledging that my own perspective inevitably shapes my focus. But in my scholarly work, I make my methodological approach transparent so my readers can understand my analytical framework. Creative writing is totally different. There, I simply embrace the fundamental truth that all storytelling is subjective. Even journalism, even history, a writer always chooses what to emphasize, what to exclude, how to frame. And my approach has always been not to pretend it's some impossible subjectivity, but rather to admit my presence in the work while committing to intellectual honesty. I think readers appreciate this authenticity. They don't want some bloodless, disembodied narrative voice. They want to feel human intelligence behind the words. And, in the end, I find this tension between stance and objectivity to be the very thing that makes writing vital. It's the friction that creates the spark.
Dr. Ellen, from courtroom dramas to poetic explorations of Southern identity, this book features a rich spectrum of genres. How important do you think genre is in shaping a writer's voice, and can genre constraint be freeing rather than limiting?
Yeah, Robert Frost used to talk about how he would write in in either blank verse or rhyming, and he felt like form was not constraining. So genre is like a cocktail dress. It may appear constraining, but within those precise lines lies the possibility for the most divine sort of expression. Genre provides a particular kind of discipline that can be tremendously liberating, actually. Take my novel about the South. It's called A Glooming Peace This Morning. That's the name of the novel. It was published in 2023. It included childhood reminiscences of Georgia summers and eccentric neighbors with a great deal of fact and truth, even as I fictionalized. The Southern Gothic tradition gave me a framework, a set of expectations to either satisfy or subvert, but the constraints of that genre forced me to find more inventive paths to expression. So I believe writers who dismiss genre entirely are like chefs who refuse to recognize the difference between a souffle and a stew. The form matters. It creates anticipation in the reader, and playing with expectations is where the real artistry happens. So a truly accomplished writer recognizes genre conventions as a sophisticated game that we play with readers. Sometimes we follow the rule precisely. Other times we transgress them with style, and that transgression itself becomes the point.
You often highlight the importance of listening, dialect, and cultural nuance, particularly in the context of Southern literature. How do you approach authenticity in your own writing, especially when poetry, cultures, and communities that are not part of your personal experience?
Yeah, authenticity is everything in writing, I think, though I find the modern fixation on so called cultural appropriation to be utterly stifling to the creative spirit. Writing is fundamentally an act of empathetic imagination. And the notion that writers should only chronicle what they've personally experienced would leave us with the most tedious, limited literature imaginable. The very essence of fiction is the ability to inhabit other people's minds, other lives, to get inside somebody else's shoes and walk around in them. So I reject categorically any suggestion that imagination should be constrained by identity. Writers have to be cultural anthropologists. We have to enter worlds with humility, but also with the conviction that human experience in all its variety remains accessible to the disciplined imagination. The greatest writers have always crossed boundaries of experience. Shakespeare wasn't Italian, but he gave us Romeo and Juliet. I got Shakespeare here on my lapel pin. He wasn't Danish, but he created Hamlet. The alternative is a balkanized literature where we're all trapped in our own little identity silos, and that would just be the death of art.
Deborah Mentella talk about agonizing over detail to achieve authenticity. In your writing journey, is there a particular moment or project where your attention to detail transformed the story?
Yeah, I mentioned my novel earlier, A Glooming Peace This Morning, which came out a couple of years ago, and it hinged entirely on those types of details, particularly in developing the courtroom scenes that formed the backbone of the narrative. My legal background, I guess, was a blessing and a curse in crafting those sections. So I initially wrote them with technical precision, every procedural element correct, every legal maneuver accurately rendered, but something was missing. The scenes felt authentic to the law, but not to the human drama. The breakthrough came when I stopped focusing on legal accuracy alone and began obsessing over the sensory details of the courtroom, the particular quality of light through those high windows, for instance. These were not just decorative touches, they were actual emotional infrastructure of the story. So I spent weeks revising a single 3-page exchange between Judge Jackson and the prosecutor, working to capture the power dynamics through micro expressions and vocal inflections rather than explicit dialogue. So these layers of detail transformed what could have been a standard legal confrontation into something that revealed the regional and class tensions underlying the entire case. I did a similar thing with the small town setting. I spent a lot of time on the details of the courthouse in particular because it was so symbolic to the narrative. The novel's moral questions about justice and reconciliation became inseparable from those painstakingly rendered physical spaces like the courtroom and like the courthouse and like the town square too.
Dr. Ellen, your book is full of unexpected connections, shared universities, publishers, or even intellectual fascinations. Do you believe shared experience between interviewer and interviewee enhance the depth of a conversation?
Oh, absolutely. No doubt about it. Shared experience creates a foundation of trust and understanding that transforms an interview from a simple Q&A into a genuine conversation like the one we're having now. So when interviewing authors, which I did, by the way, in the form of emails, I would email them back and forth. I didn't do a voice interview the way we're doing it now. So when I was interviewing authors who attended the same universities or worked with the same publishers I had, there was immediate shorthand that developed. We could reference specific professors, editorial approaches, or campus locations without lengthy explanations, and that allowed us to dive deeper into substantive matters more quickly. In editing the collection, putting together the different interviews, I didn't know I was going to create a book when I was doing all these interviews. It was the idea of an editor who later told me, oh, you should collect all these and I'll publish it. But as I was editing it, I noticed that the most revealing exchanges often emerge from these points of connection. So, for instance, when discussing the creative process with writers who share my fascination with the South, we could bypass the introductory justifications and move directly to the nuanced tensions that make the subject so rich for literary explanation. This didn't mean that the interviews required perfect alignment of experience. Sometimes the most illuminating moments came from just partial overlaps where our experiences were similar enough to establish rapport, but different enough to create productive friction. So what ultimately made the connections valuable wasn't just the comfort they provided, but how they served as jumping off points for deeper explanation.
One thing you masterfully balances is conversation about both literature and current cultural tensions. Do you believe writers today have a responsibility to engage with contemporary socio-political issues?
I think the answer to that is no. And I would say emphatically no. The notion that writers must engage with the petty political squabbles of the moment is precisely, in my opinion, what's producing so much forgettable literature these days. The truly great works, the ones that endure for centuries, transcend their immediate political context. Like look at Les Mis, for example. Hugo wasn't writing he wasn't writing a tiresome tract about current French politics. He was exploring timeless themes of justice, redemption, and human dignity against the backdrop of a genuinely momentous historical period. So the contemporary obsession with forcing writers to comment on every fleeting political controversy is producing novels with the shelf life of yesterday's newspapers. It's dreary, predictable, and frankly, artistically stifling. Our current political moment, despite what the hysterical commentariat might claim, is hardly comparable to the French Revolution or the American Civil War. These tedious novels fixated on narrow contemporary issues will be incomprehensible in 20 years, let alone a century. Great literature deals with the eternal human condition, love, death, betrayal, redemption. Politics enters only insofar as it illuminates these deeper truths. So Dickens, for example, wasn't merely critiquing the workhouse system. He was examining the human capacity for cruelty and compassion. So in my opinion, writers should be observers, not activists. The moment you subordinate your artistic vision to political dogma, you cease being an artist and you become a propagandist. And propaganda, however well-intentioned, makes for dreadfully boring reading. If writers wish to be remembered beyond the next election cycle, they would do well to aim higher than the fleeting concerns of our particular political moment and reach instead for the universal. That's what separates the immortals from the forgotten.
Writers on writing doesn't shy away from discomfort, especially on topics like race, history, and conflict. How can interviews like this model respectful discourse in a time of increasing polarization?
Yeah, these interviews, I like to think, demonstrate precisely what our fractured cultural landscape so desperately lacks, and that's genuine conversation rather than performative outrage. What we're suffering from isn't too much discourse about uncomfortable topics. It's the wrong kind of discourse. This wretched clickbait culture has reduced complex questions to the intellectual equivalent of professional wrestling. It's all spectacle, no substance. In the interviews I conducted, you'll notice there's never that tedious moral preening that dominates today's public square. When we discuss the most sensitive subjects, we maintain what's now almost extinct, sadly, civilized exchange between minds that respect each other in disagreement. The democratization of cultural discourse, this notion that every voice deserves equal weight, regardless of education, refinement, or capacity for nuance, has produced precisely what Irving Babbitt, who's one of my favorite authors, warned us about: a race to the lowest common denominator. When the mob sets the cultural tone, is it any surprise we end up with gladiatorial combat rather than Socratic dialogue? I'm not sure. What makes the exchanges in my book valuable isn't consensus. We often disagree sharply, but rather their immunity to the virus of manufactured outrage. I try not to play to the digital gallery or audition for moral sainthood. I don't think my interviewees did either. So if there's hope for rescuing our cultural conversation, it's in these small islands of serious discourse where ideas can be explored without immediate conscription into some political crusade, where the aim isn't to destroy an opponent, but to illuminate a subject from multiple angles.
Very insightful. Dr. Ellen, given your rich background in both law and academia, your literary discussion often navigate between the philosophical and the practical. How do you personally strike a balance between the theoretical aspects of storytelling and the day-to-day discipline of actually sitting down to write?
Well, it's interesting that you would ask that question, because when I was in graduate school getting my PhD, I focused on 19th century American literature, but also literature and pragmatism, the American philosophy of pragmatism. And so when considering the balance between theoretical storytelling and the daily discipline of writing, I'm guided by C.S. Peirce's pragmatic maxim that the meaning of a concept lies in its practical consequences. This distinctly American philosophical tradition actually cuts through abstract speculation by asking a simple question: what difference does this make in practice? So in my approach to writing, I've come to embrace what Peirce called the irritation of doubt as a productive force. When theoretical questions about narrative structure or character development arise, I evaluate them not by their abstract elegance, but by how they function on the page. Does this theory actually improve the work? Does it solve a concrete problem in the manuscript? If not, it remains merely intellectual entertainment, and I want to try to get rid of it. Oliver Wendell Holmes Jr. was a U.S. Supreme Court justice. I wrote my PhD dissertation about him, and he was also influential in how I shaped my approach. So he exemplified how judicial reasoning, while grounded in theoretical principles, must always be tested against lived reality. He showed that philosophy becomes meaningful when applied to concrete circumstances. Obviously, law is applied philosophy. You're doing jurisprudence, but applying it to real world circumstances. So when I'm struggling with a narrative problem, I'll recall Holmes's approach to constitutional interpretation, judging ideas by their consequences rather than their abstract purity. And this keeps me from being paralyzed by theoretical perfection and pushes to embrace the experimental nature of creation. So again, I love this American pragmatic tradition. I think it offers a uniquely practical framework for writers.
Dr. Ellen, my last question. At the heart of this book is an egalitarian spirit. Famous authors and emerging voices are given equal respect. As a writer or reader, how important is it to you that literary conversations reflect that inclusivity?
Oh gosh, well, I'm grateful that you would think that of the book, but interestingly, it kind of goes against some of my philosophical proclivities. So I think that the notion that literary conversations should prioritize inclusivity by giving equal respect to famous authors and unknown scribblers betrays a fundamental misunderstanding of how intellectual value works. I actually think that literary merit is not democratically determined. Some voices simply contribute more than others. Some insights are genuinely more profound. Some writing contains more truth and beauty. The greatest disservice to literature is pretending otherwise. The egalitarian, obsession with ensuring that everyone gets equal attention regardless of the quality of their contribution is what I think dilutes intellectual discourse. Meaningful literary conversation must be hierarchical, actually, in my opinion. Again, it must elevate the truly exceptional while being ruthlessly honest about mediocrity. The entire concept of inclusivity in literature is a pointless distraction from the only question that matters, which is the work good? Does it illuminate truth? Does it advance our understanding? The author's status, whether it's famous or emerging, is entirely irrelevant to those questions. The truly beneficial literary ecosystem is one that establishes rigorous standards and applies them without regard to fashionable concerns about representation. The cream rises naturally when merit alone determines who gets attention. An artificial flattening of literary hierarchy doesn't help emerging voices. It patronizes them. It suggests they can't compete on the basis of excellence alone and that they need special accommodation. And I think that's actually condescending. The literary world should be the ultimate meritocracy, ruthlessly selective, as I mentioned, brutally honest, and gloriously unconcerned with anything but the pursuit of truth and beauty, regardless of who produces it or how many voices are included in the conversation.
Listeners, it has been an absolute honor to host Dr. Ellen Mendenhall on today's episode. As a scholar, writer, lawyer, and a gifted conversationalist, Dr. Mendenhall brings a rare and deeply insightful perspective to the world of literature and ideas. We are grateful for the wisdom, candor, and warmth he has brought to the episode. If you haven't yet, I highly recommend picking up a copy of Writers on Writing, Conversations with Ellen Mendenhall, a true treasure for writers, readers, and thinkers alike. Thank you, Dr. Mendenhall, for joining us and sharing your journey.
Well, thank you very much. It was an honor to be here, and I really appreciate your time in doing this. Thank you.